Good morning, everybody. This is Carl, or afternoon, or whatever, tomorrow, if you're in another time zone. Welcome to our webinar. Thank you for being here. I'm always thoroughly gratified and pleased to see over 100 people register for these things. I just never get over the fact that there's so many people who are so engaged in this community. And so my goal is to help you get some useful information here, improve your business. I will be taking questions, so we have a Q&A tool that you can find on the Zoom toolbar. I have disabled the chat. I believe it was invented by alien robots trying to take over the earth. And so, you know, they gave us rock salt to destroy our roads, and they gave us chat to destroy our minds. So anyway, that's just my personal opinion. We are starting right on time. I guarantee somebody will complain about that, but I just sort of feel like you don't get to complain when somebody starts a meeting on time. It's just, I don't know, just one of those rules of life. So anyway, thank you for being here. We got, I don't know, almost 40 people online already, and the rest will show up when they show up. So for those of you who have not met me, my name is Karl Palachuk. I've written a wide variety of books, mostly about helping IT service providers run their businesses more effectively and more profitably. And I sort of believe that these books are just a great investment in your business. And, you know, if you think about a book, you say, well, how much labor do I have to make or save to pay for this book? And you know, in all cases, it's less than an hour. And in many cases, it's less than half an hour. And if you're really good at what you do, it's less than 15 minutes. So anyway, so these books are available on my sites or on Amazon, Audible, so forth and so on. The service agreement book is not available as an audio book because there's just too much liability in having you fall asleep while driving and listening to me read legal documents. So anyway, if you're not connected with me, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I have a handful of slots still open on Facebook, lots of space on Twitter, obviously, Instagram. So I would love to be connected with you. Today, we're going to talk about time. And the interesting thing is I do maybe 3 or 4 major presentations on time for one of my books. It's called Relax, Focus, Succeed. And I talk about how time is really an option. And that's a concept a lot of people don't really grasp very well at first. But if you think about it, when we say, oh, I don't have time for that, what you're really saying is, that's not a high enough priority for me to pay attention to. And so all time is always an option. And so I want you to think of that as we go through this presentation today. And, you know, I'm just a huge believer, having built and sold a couple of managed service businesses and having helped other people reach goals of, you know, $1, $5, $10 million. I'm really big on the central role of time inside your service business. And it's fundamentally the most important thing. You know, money is important, but money is directly tied to time. So we're going to talk about the concept of outstanding time and, you know, how do we try to figure out how to manage it? So what we're going to do, we're going to have a presentation, and I will take some questions along the way. So some I will save for the end, but don't feel shy. Go ahead and queue up your questions. And then when we're done, I'm going to try to leave enough time at the end so that I don't want to butt you right up against the next hour. So with luck, we will be done and have all the questions out of the way by the top of the hour. And that way, if you, assuming you have other things to do in your day, you can go do that. So there's that. So time is one of those things where it really is the most important thing in your business. It's the most expensive thing you buy, and it's the most expensive thing you sell. And so if you're in service delivery, even if you do flat fee projects or all flat fee services, it is time that you're selling. And a lot of people have somehow made some disconnect there about actually selling time. And so they say, well, I don't need to track it because we're selling flat fee. That's the biggest mistake you can make, because you have no way of determining your profitability unless you're tracking time. Now you can say, end of the day, you open QuickBooks and you got $2 more than you had yesterday. Okay, great. But almost everybody on this call could literally be 10% more profitable by simply tracking time appropriately. And that is no exaggeration. It's no bullshit. If you track all of your time quite rigorously, all of a sudden you will be more successful. And, you know, one of my great beliefs in life is that you get better at whatever you put your attention on. So if you want to suddenly be better at managing time, all you have to do is just pay attention to it. You know, we have always, in my companies, always had this pattern of, did you put your time in the system? Are your notes in the system? Is your time in the system? Did you log your time? And that ongoing discussion with technicians is one of these things where it becomes really clear to them that this is important, not just to me, not just to the nagger, but to the entire company. It's important to the company that you put your time in the system. And so it's critically important because, as we're going to show you in a minute, it's what allows you to determine all kinds of other critically important numbers. And the really sad thing is we are in an industry in IT where we have such amazing tools, and they allow us to do 90% of what we need to do for tracking time. And not one of them does 100%. Not one of them takes you the last 10 yards to the touchdown. So you got to figure out, how do you use your system appropriately, and then what else do you need to do, whether it's with Excel or whatever. But you've got to track that time, and you got to put these numbers together. There are so many metrics. You've all seen the, KPIs, key performance indicators, that you should be tracking. EBITDA and, percentage of revenue that comes from services and whatever. But we're going to show you just a few key numbers that are actually far more important than those other things. Like if you say, I know what percentage of my revenue comes from services. That's cool. That's all good. But you have a long story to tell me why that matters. Like, why should I care what your percentage of revenue from services is? Right? It's not obvious. So we're going to show you why tracking time and knowing certain numbers is directly related to your profitability. So if you track 100% of the time inside your company, that means every single thing every person does. So let's say that you have 8 technicians, 1 service manager, 1 owner who does a lot of sales and maybe a little bit of tech support in an emergency, front office staff. They all use up time. And that time, when you're an employer, that time is money. Now, if you don't have any employees, that's cool, but your time is money as well. And so many people don't track their own time, right? They say, I'm the owner, I don't have to track my time. Actually, you do. But when you look at all the time in your company, let's say that let's just round it up to nice, even 10 employees. Well, 40 hours a week, that's 400 hours of labor per week that's being used for something. And there's a certain amount that's overhead, right? You have meetings, you drive to clients, you probably don't charge for driving to clients. You have sales meetings, you have internal meetings to talk about training, tech support. What are we going to do about Microsoft's new rules, blah, 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 right? Your time it cannot be 100% billable, not possible. So how billable is it? How much of your time is spent in providing hourly labor? And, 20 years ago, people in service industries literally drew a line between the number of hours worked and the number of hours billed, right? And the only thing that mattered is how many hours you billed. And so that's the only thing they tracked. So let's say that you bill 15 hours a week. Great. 15 hours a week, $100 an hour. That's, $1,500. Great. Awesome. But how much of your time was spent doing other things that are productive in your business? And so when I talk about billability, I use that term to include labor in support of managed services. So let's say a client pays you $3,000 a month. How many hours can you give that client and still remain profitable? If you're a one-person shop, your cost of labor is this fictional number of 0, but that's not really true. If you have employees, then it's whatever, $20, $25 an hour plus the fully burdened cost of that labor. So it's definitely not 0. And that technician is not 100% billable, right? So, there is a number, there's a calculation that you can do, and it matters. And so some of the work that you do is what we call rework. So rework happens whenever you do a job twice. It happens when you send a technician out and they can't figure it out. They log an hour of time. You pay for an hour of time plus drive time, whatever. Then you send somebody else out. They fix it. Well, now you've got an hour that you can bill to the client, but 2 hours plus travel time that you have to pay your employees. So you might have lost money on that, but you gotta track that unbillable time in order to know that number. And then of course, flat fee labor. I love flat fee projects. If we're gonna migrate somebody to the cloud, that might be, small office, 10 people, 25 hours. Might be 50 hours, depending on how much labor and how big their mailboxes are. But, you charge a nice big flat fee, and then you use your tools to make more money. When I hear people say, oh, managed services doesn't work for me, 99.999% of the time, they're not doing managed services. What they're doing is break fix, and they're charging flat fees. Well, that's not the same thing at all. Part of the thing that makes managed services work is you use your tools. I just had a discussion with somebody 2 days ago who has owned Kaseya for a long time and doesn't know how to use the scripting. And all I can think of is, wow, imagine how much labor you could get rid of and how many more clients you could support without hiring anybody if you just learned how to use the scripting in your RMM tool, right? We can multiply our time significantly when we use the right tools. So anytime you track time, you're tracking money, whether that is time spent supporting clients, that is, in other words, time going out of the system, or if it's the time that clients put into your system when they put tickets in your system, that's time coming into your business. And time flows in and out of your business every minute of every day. If you wake up in the morning and there's 10 new tickets in the system, that's roughly 10 hours of time where clients have said, we need this work, we need you to do this, we rely on you. May or may not be directly billable hourly, but it is at least in support of a flat fee service. So that's time coming into the system. Technicians, if you're lucky, they're gonna knock out a good 30 hours a week, so time will move out of your system, and that's a 75% billable technician, and that's a rare technician, but you might just have a couple of them. So one of the fallacies we have is that people say, well, I don't have to track the time for a number of reasons, and one of them is I don't have to track the time because it's a flat fee contract. Well, the truth is, there are people, and you may be one of them, who have clients that are, not only are they unprofitable, but you can literally point to the clients that are unprofitable. You can say, this person only gives me $250 a month, and we spend 3 hours of labor. I'm sorry, you're losing money on that client. And I don't even know why you keep that client. But if you know that, if you can look at it, you should be able to examine it and figure out, all right, how do we either fix the relationship or get rid of that client? I'd much rather have a client that gives me $1,000 a month and takes 3 hours of labor, right? There's absolutely no question which one of these is more profitable. So if you track time, then you can determine how profitable a technician is, a project is, even a single ticket, and certainly a client, a contract, a project, right? But you got to do that time tracking. So in our heads, we have this sense of like, oh yeah, I'm going to bill 40 hours a week. I remember I started my business in 1995 and I had this calculation. I'm going to charge 40 hours a week, 2,000 hours a year. I was going to charge at the time, I was going to charge $100 an hour. That's $200,000 a year. As you probably know, if you've started a business, it took a long time for me to get to the point where I earned $200,000 or $300,000 a year, and I didn't do it alone. It took another technician and a lot of gyration in order to make that happen. Most people, most teams, if you have a team of 3 or more technicians, your team is probably between 50 and 60% billable. And so that means at 2,000 hours a year, you're able to sell an average of 1,000 hours a year. If you charge $150 an hour, which you should because it's the 21st century, your best case scenario is $150,000 of income, not profit. So you have to be quite realistic about this. And I remember when I first started my business, I used to make this odd calculation where there was going to be an expense, right? Like, oh, okay. So if I'm going to buy this marketing program from Robin Robbins, right? Or I'm going to join ASCII, that's going to cost me whatever, let's say $120 a month, right? So like, okay, that realistically is going to cost me 1 hour of labor. Well, that's an absurd calculation. I know that now. I didn't know that then. Because really, to put out an expense of $120, I have to pretty much count on 2 hours of labor in order to have 1 billable hour of labor. And, you know, it's still, I think, a good calculation to say, how many hours of my time does it take to pay for this investment? I think that's a great calculation in our business. But you got to be pretty realistic about it. And you also have to say, I have to count labor other than the billable hourly labor. Like that calculation isn't enough to get me where I need to go. So I got to pay attention to that. So when you look at your business, you have two primary kinds of time. We're going to look at this in a little more detail on the next slide, but the first easy division is internal time and external time. So internal time is time spent inside your business. This is you, the owner, the service manager, the sales manager, talking to your employees, having meetings, hiring people, doing evaluations, taking tests, studying, anything where somebody is in the office or is on the clock. They are working in support of your business, or they're doing whatever they need to do inside the business. And it's unrelated to actually selling time to clients. Now, some of it is going to be selling time, but for the most part, the selling time is going to be external. Okay, so 99% of your internal time is spent running the business. That number is never zero. And so, again, one of our assumptions is that it takes nothing to run a business. Well, it takes a lot. And, all, Amy Babinchak, I think, is the one who I first heard say this about, the first time you hire somebody, you literally, it's the only time you have doubled the size of your business, right? From then on, you can hire another one, and now you've increased it by 50%, 30%, 25%. It just goes down, down, down. But the first time you hire somebody, there's this massive change, and you have to have a change in your mindset. The other thing is, even if you're a one-person shop, you can't burn out. You literally cannot work 3,000 hours a year and expect to maintain that for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. It's not humanly possible. And that's why so many people get burned out at around 15, 20 years. They're like, man, I've been doing this forever. I'm not making any progress. And they literally have to come to the understanding that they are not working as smart as they could work, and they're not using time the way that they should. So external time is anything that's client facing, or to be honest, anything that you're trying to make client facing. So, what I call productive work in support of flat fee projects and managed services, right? That's quote unquote billable labor, even though it's not, you don't actually send a separate invoice for it. Billable hourly labor, obviously, and then anything that's not billable, right? So sometimes you have, and the non-billable training on the right side here, this is you training your clients. So I'm a big fan of every quarter, I want to go out to a client's office and train them on tips and tricks with Outlook, tips and tricks with Excel, how to get the most out of calendars, whatever it is, ransomware, all kinds of trainings. It puts us in the client's office. It has huge value, but it's external time. And if I'm not charging for it, I still have to track it. It is part of the cost of me doing business. So then the next division I want to make is between external and internal. You have actual time and potential time. So actual time is literally, when you look at employee wages, employee comes to work, they work 8 hours, they go home. They must be paid for 8 actual hours. Now, you're never going to get 8 hours. Well, you're rarely going to get 8 hours of billable labor out of them because they have drive time. They sit in meetings. They talk to you, right? They clean up their desk. They do things that need to be done, but they don't get to bill a client for it. But the easiest way to track that is by looking at their actual time in tickets and then time on other tasks. And then there's other time that just kind of disappears into the ether if you don't track it. Potential time is the unused employee time. So I have on occasion met people who say, well, we have much higher capacity, that we have enough employees so that on the busiest day when the most stuff hits the fan, we will be able to cover it and clients won't have to wait more than an hour for a callback. So they're staffed for a worst case scenario, which means on the average day, they have employees with an hour here and an hour there. That is really, you can always fill time, but it's not super productive, right? We also have unallocated time. And the worst case scenario for this is when you hire somebody new and you say, I don't have time to train you, so sit in that chair and watch me while I try to think of something to have you do, right? That's obviously a red flag that you need a better employee onboarding process. But there's always this available time, potential time that it sits inside your company, but it goes unused. But if you don't track it, you have no idea what your actual usable time and your potential time. You have no idea what the ratio is between those. With luck, the actual used time in your system is 75, 80%, but you don't know until you measure it, right? And that, at the end of the day, that's the way it is. And I haven't looked to see if he's on the call today, but I had a client one time, a coaching client, that told me, hey, we're doing really well. We're tracking like 70% of our time. And all I could think of is, really? Until you track 100% of your time, how do you know you're tracking 70% of your time, right? It's one of those things where you either do it or you don't. The external time, again, you have the time that you log into tickets. This is actual service delivery. Many people are good at tracking drive time, even if they don't bill for it. So it's like in support of that service. A lot of people do not ask salespeople to track time, and so they have no idea how long it takes them to make a sale. They have some weird concept in their head, but they have no hard data to say, I spent, 17 hours trying to make this sale. And it was 15 minutes here and 10 minutes there and an hour meeting there and prepping a quote and, da-da-da-da-da. If you don't know how long it takes to make a sale, it's really hard to allocate resources appropriately. And then the potential time, this is the biggie. Focus on that word backlog. And backlog, I think, sometimes has a negative connotation for some people, as if the backlog is a bad thing. Backlog is a really good thing. If you have no backlog, you're what they call out of business, right? If you have a zero backlog, you have no work to do tomorrow. So the backlog is good, but the backlog must be manageable. It must be the right size. So when I ask you, okay, how long does it take you to go through your backlog? What's your churn rate? Most people don't really know that. Most people on this call cannot tell me how many hours they have in their ticketing system. They don't know what the outstanding balance of all those tickets adds up to, and they don't know, because they can't know, how long it takes them to go through that. Is it a week? Is it a month? Is it a year? Right? What does that look like? Another potential time is time that's sold but unused. So that's another juicy good thing. Let's say that you've sold blocks of time to whatever, 50 clients. You sold them each a block of time, and every one of them has time that hasn't been used yet. An hour here, an hour there, an hour there. That's a huge resource, right? But it also has to be managed. If you've suddenly got 2 hours each times 50 employees and they all want something done this week, well, that's 100 hours that suddenly comes into your system and you got to deal with it. You should be aware of what that is, even if the chances that a crisis like that happens are very slim. You should at least have some philosophy of how you deal with it. And again, feel free to put questions in if you have any, and I'm going to take a sip of coffee. So which time do you track? The employees, obviously, you're going to look at the time that they work on various tickets. You're going to have what I call administrative overhead. So this is time spent in meetings, cleaning up the storeroom, taking delivery of UPS packages, studying for Microsoft exams, taking exams, whatever you let people do on the clock, it needs to be tracked. All of those things are legitimate activities in support of running your business. And so you can't begrudge employees the fact that they get a 15-minute break in the morning and they spend time cleaning up their desk. It's in your best interest in the long run. And then there's personal time. So let's say somebody's allocated 40 hours a week, but on Thursday they leave at 3 o'clock. They're going to go pick up their kid and take them to a play. Totally fine, not a worry. So now they're down to 38 hours a week, but they have to mark that as personal time so that you know what the ratio is. And again, even if they're on salary, they only had 38 usable hours that week. And so if they billed 30 of them, that's different than if they had 40 usable hours and billed 30 of them, right? So you have to be very careful that you're accurate with these things. So for me, I use the first two of these, time worked on tickets and administrative time. I add those up, and that's payroll. And every ticketing system is different. Every PSA is different. The easiest PSA for tracking payroll is, in my opinion, is ConnectWise, followed by AutoTask. And what I would do is I always paid technicians based on how much time was in the system. You have to track your 40 hours, time on tickets, time on administration, personal time off, right? This has to add up to a certain number. If you don't track personal time, then what happens is you've got this 2 hours missing. Was he taking his daughter to a play, or was he working on a client and then we didn't put it in the system, or was he sidetracked on something, or did he fail to put his time in a timely manner, and as a result, he just misremembered how much time he spent doing anything, right? So this has to be important from the top down in order for it to be something that the technicians actually pay attention to. But I'm a huge fan of using your ticketing system to track payroll. It is right there. It solves the one complaint I have heard for 20 years. I can't get my technicians to put their time in the system. Well, that's easy. Pay them for exactly how much time is in the system, period. End of story. You know, in California, we can't pay a salary unless somebody is either earning over $80,000 a year, or they actually manage other people. And I'm totally fine with that. I love paying by the hour. I'm totally happy to pay 40 hours, even if somebody works 38, but I need to know how much of that was on the clock, right? That is quote unquote billable time, and how much is administrative and so forth. The other time you got to track is the client time. So again, whether it is flat fee or hourly, doesn't matter. You need to know how much time you spend on every single client. And I even was happy to do a hand entry in QuickBooks for every client every month. So we actually put a number in QuickBooks of how many hours of labor, so that I could go to QuickBooks and just run a report and say, you know, what did everybody buy for the year, you know, sales by customer, and then go to detail, and you get a nice report, and it's got a little total that says whatever, 247 hours and, you know, $39,000 in revenue. And you just can make a calculation that way. Obviously, if you've got really good systems inside your PSA or your ticketing system, you can track it there as well. But again, they have ways for you to put these numbers in. Most of them don't have a good way for you to get that number out. But it's critically important because you have clients. Everybody on this call has a client whose effective billable rate is under $75 an hour. You need to either raise your rates, change the nature of the relationship, or get rid of that client. Everybody on this call has a client who is literally, their effective billable rate is probably closer to $1,000 an hour. You need to find out who they are. You need to let them introduce you to all of their friends, and you need to go get 6 more clients just like that, right? But, you know, the clients, the effective billable rate is all over the map no matter what you do. There are people who sign flat fee contracts and never put a ticket in the system. Happy to have them. I am absolutely happy to have them. That happens a lot with cloud services, by the way. So if you're not selling cloud services, go do that starting this afternoon. But you got to know what those numbers are in order to make those calculations. And then finally, you have the ticket backlog time. And we're going to talk about this obviously a little bit more, but basically every single ticket needs to have a time estimate. And when you add all of those up, you can know the number of outstanding hours you have in your system. So this is my personal smartass definition of time management. Series of absurd attempts to focus on important things without paying any attention to what's important, and instead focusing energy on the one element over which you have no control whatsoever. You cannot control time. You know, there's literally, you could go down to Barnes & Noble and find 1,000 different books and magazine articles and things on time management. And what do they all amount to is trying to get your arms around something you can't control. Time is a tool that you use. Time is a resource that you buy. It's a resource that you sell. And even if you have flat fee, there's still a resource. There's still time behind that. Instead, you should focus on what's important. You know, your success is determined by working from priorities, from highest to lowest priority. And that gives you a focus on what matters in your company what matters to your clients, what matters in your ticketing system, what matters in your specific kind of service delivery, which is going to be different from mine or anybody else's. And your success depends not only on which priorities you set, but how effectively you move your entire team towards supporting those priorities. So if you say, you know, we put a priority on good customer service, but our response time is about a day and a half. Well, you know, that's fine. You got a nice poster on the wall, but you haven't really put that as your priority. Other people say, hey, you know, we put a priority on good employee relationships or whatever. How does that show up? Where do those priorities show up in your standard operating procedures? Because, you know, you can talk the talk all you want, but until you walk the walk, they're not really your priorities. And, you know, this is one of these things where when I say time is a choice, when something becomes a priority, you will find time for it. People always say, oh, I don't have time to organize my SOPs. I don't have time to document my work. Well, okay. All you're really saying is, it's not a priority for me to document my work. It's not a priority for me. You know, if you've been in business for 10 years and you have no employee onboarding process, it's not a priority for you. And it's okay to admit that. And you know, someday you may get around to it, but don't tell me that it's a high priority if you've never done it, ever. I had an employee one time who, he worked for me at one company, and then I moved to another company and he came to work for that company as well. And over the course of about 5 years, he kept coming to me and saying, you know, give me the knowledge, show me how to do this, show me how to do this. And I'm like, dude, you've been asking me to show you how to do something for 5 years. Pick up a book, you know, go figure it out, right? And you know, it's one of these things where you can't rely on other people to make you successful. You have to rely on priorities, and then the people will follow the priorities, and that will make you successful. Profit is different from success. Profit is a separately measurable thing. And it's based on how well you manage money and how well you manage all the money that comes into and out of your company. Because there's a lot of companies that they make a lot of money, but they don't make a lot of profit. And I'm way more interested in profit than I am in revenue. If somebody says, oh, we're a $3 million company, but they're making a good solid 4% profit, I'll take the $2 million company that's making a 10% profit, right? And profit is determined by how effectively you use time. And I don't mean manage it. I don't mean saying, oh, let's stretch another hour out of the day. That's not the way you manage time. The way you effectively use time is that you track it, you allocate it appropriately, and you treat it like a very, very valuable resource. There are very few things in your life that you can look at one little thing, pick it up and say, that's worth $150 or that's worth $100. But an hour of time is worth exactly that. Whatever your rate is, it is worth that, and you need to give it the respect it is due. Like if you picked up a pencil and you said, that's a $150 pencil, you'd have a whole new respect for it. Well, you should have that kind of respect for the time in your system. Don't let it just disappear into the ether. So the biggest mistake that people make in service delivery, and all of the PSAs encourage you to do this, they encourage you to make this mistake, is to line up your technicians in 15-minute increments all day long, and it's literally a set of dominoes, and at 9:08 a.m. you're behind, and you stay behind for the rest of the day, and sometimes you're behind by 2 or 3 or 4 blocks of time. And, you know, if you've ever lined up dominoes so that you can make those little strings where you knock them down over, you know, whatever, across the entire table, you only have to take out one domino out of the middle, and a domino can fall and it won't knock down the rest of them. You need to add those spaces of time into your system. You need to use time effectively, and you need to have blocks where there's kind of catch-up time. I would rather see you throw away your calendars, disable your calendar in your PSA, and have technicians work from highest to lowest priority. If every technician knows which tickets they can take based on priority, then what they do is when they're finished with a job, they look at the service board and they say, I'm going to look at the priority 1 tickets and I'm going to see which one I am capable of dealing with. I may not be the guy who supports firewalls, but I can certainly take care of a server that needs a critical update. So they take the most important ticket they can and they work it. And if every single person is always working on the most important thing that they need to do, suddenly lots of things go right in your service board management. You take care of the most important things first, all of the crises go away. The clients are very happy because the little stuff does get taken care of in time, but the most important stuff gets taken care of right away. Everybody realizes when you take care of the most important things first, what happens is a lot of that little stuff goes away. It kind of takes care of itself because the big stuff got taken care of. And so it's a great way to organize your business. And I know some of you're so dyed in the wool, this is foreign to you, but I'm just telling you, if you have the guts to do this for a week, it will change your business. It'll change the way that you work with your team. So the good news is that if you have a ticketing system, you have a PSA, it literally can solve most of your problems, but you have to use it. And you use it to track your internal tasks. You use it to track the priorities of your clients, the priorities of your system. If a salesperson sells a project, it might show up either as a project in the project module or as, say, 5 or 6 tickets, individual tickets in the ticketing system, but they can all have different priorities. They can be allocated time. You can put time estimates on every single one of them, and then life gets better and better. Like, that tool is there. And if you have a PSA that doesn't do all of that, then you have to figure out how you're going to put priorities and time estimates in all of your tickets. Even if you have to create a field that says time estimate 1 hour, you should do that so that there is some way. And even if you have to then track the backlog on an Excel spreadsheet, you should do that. It is so important. Once you start doing that, lots of other things come in line. So there are 3 key steps I want to give you. And the first one is track 100% of your employee time inside the PSA. So this is the time they spent doing billable labor, the time they spend on flat fee contracts, the time that they spend on personal stuff. And so it's outside of the calculation for quote unquote billability. And the golden number that results from this is the billability of every single technician. You will find on average, these are true numbers, a good technician who sits in an office and never leaves and sits in a cubicle and helps people over the phone is going to be about 80% billable at best. A good technician who drives around the county and goes from client to client is going to be 60 or 65% billable. A really good service manager might be 30 to 40% billable, depending on how technical they are. More technical, probably closer to 40s. Less technical, probably closer to 30s. An owner who does sales will be 10 or 20% billable. And there's no judgment on any of this. This is simply reality. So you need to determine the billability of each technician on your staff. And if this were a class, I'd be giving you homework, and your homework would be number 1, determine the billability of every technician in your office. If you can't do that, it means you don't have time tracking inside your system, or at least you're not using it. Step number 2 is use that number that we just determined to figure out the profitability of your entire team, right? This will tell you how profitable an employee is. When you look at how billable your team is, it will help you determine how billable a client is, or a project, or a contract, right? It will also help you figure out how much money is in your backlog, right? Let's say that you've got a backlog of 1,000 hours, and your average team billability is 50%, which is a low number, but just for, it makes math easy. That means you got to buy 2,000 hours. Well, what does 2,000 hours cost you on average from your team? These, some of you don't like math, but I'm just telling you that this is what you need to do if you want to know those numbers. So the employee billability is what makes this possible, and that's why that's a golden number. So when you look at what's billable to a client, you have, hourly, and then you have flat fee and internal admin, all of that. You have to track 40 hours a week, and I say no gaps, no overlaps. If everybody wants to talk about the exceptions to the rules, fine. We can do that on another webinar. But basically, you should be working on one thing at a time. If you're working on setting up machines for, 2 different clients, fine. Allocate the time 50-50, but it should still be allocated. And so here's an example. You've got 10 hours of billable labor, an hour of rework. You do 14 hours in support of managed service contracts, 4 hours in support of flat fee projects, and then you have some administrative overhead. So that's meetings, drive time, studying for exams, whatever it might be. Total is 27 hours of productive labor. That makes you 70% billable. Okay, so that technician is 70% billable. Awesome. So that means that in order to provide the hours that you need to knock out that backlog, you're going to pay this person about 1.5 hours for every hour that you're able to bill to a client or count as productive labor towards a service agreement. Does that make sense for everybody? It's kind of hard not, I don't have people nodding or, looking quizzical in the back row. So then you look at your team, right? And then these are the numbers that I talked about earlier. So you got your service manager, and then you got Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, right? Overall, when you take out the whole number of hours you pay for and the whole number of hours you are able to work to, in support of an actual contract, this team is 60% billable. That is a very realistic number. It is not uncommon at all for a team to be in the range of 60-65% billable. It is extraordinarily rare for a team to be 75 or 80% billable. It's also extraordinarily rare for a team to be 50% billable, right? That 50% example was super low, right? You need to be in the 60s, right? So that's kind of a ballpark, if you don't know what it is, go measure it and hope it's in that range. So step number 3 is to use the backlog to help manage your company. And here's what I mean by that. This whole thing, right, is about, we called this webinar about tracking the outstanding time in your company. The outstanding time in your company is your backlog, okay? So the backlog is going to be used when you say, okay, let's say that you've got a certain number of backlog. Let's say it's 300 hours, and you knock out, in this example, 120 billable hours, right, in a week. So yeah, you got, a little over 2 weeks backlog, right? That's good. Well, you have to determine what's your normal backlog. Is it going to be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, right? What's normal? I love to be able to schedule, I always used to tell clients, we want to try to schedule things about 3 days out, which means unless it's high priority, if you put in a ticket today, I'm going to work it Monday, right? But you need to know, the service manager needs to know when to schedule work, right? When can we add a project? The salesperson needs to be aware of this. The salesperson needs to know, can we start a project next week? Probably not if you've got 1,000 hours of backlog, but depending on what your burn rate is, if you're burning 250 hours a week, okay, well, we can probably fit something in 2 weeks. Easily, we can fit something in 3 weeks. Right? We're going to bloat that backlog a little bit, but it helps us manage whether or not we need to hire somebody. It helps us manage if the backlog is shrinking, maybe we need to lay somebody off, or just tell them, hey, you guys did a really great job this week. Don't come in on Friday, right? But you got to figure out what's the norm in the business, right? And so the backlog is another golden number. Many, many juicy and delightful details come out of knowing what your backlog number is. So here's an example from this, Remember, every ticket in the system has to have a valid time estimate, right? And that includes projects. So if you got a project, let's say you're migrating to the cloud, and you got 50 hours in the project, well, that's 14 hours are spent moving desktop profiles, and 7 hours are spent moving the data or copying the data, and 1 hour is spent making sure all the accounts are set up right. 2 hours are spent in training. 1 hour before, 1 hour, whatever it is. You need to put in all of those time estimates, and then you need to have people work on the appropriate ticket. And that way you maintain the integrity and the profitability of each project, but it also gives you really, really good juicy information that can be used to create an accurate time estimate for the next project that looks something like that. So if you have 100 hours of backlog and you're 60% billable, you need about 167 hours of employee labor to work through the backlog. So you can see where this calculation goes directly to profitability. What does that team get paid? How much money goes out of your pocket to deliver 167 hours of employee labor? And that's got to be wages plus rent, electricity, internet connectivity, mileage, blah, blah, right? Whatever your overhead is. There's a real number that you can calculate from that. And, again, if you don't track this stuff, I promise you have clients that are costing you money. And, you need to make the situation go away or make the clients go away. So if you have 10 technicians, 65% billable, you can produce 260 hours of labor. If your backlog is 500 hours, then you can empty the pipeline in 2 weeks. Obviously, you never want to empty the pipeline, right? But how fast does that time get replenished? How many hours go into your system every day? If you track your backlog, which is super easy to do, easier in some tools than in others, but basically, if you put an accurate time estimate in every ticket, then you total them all up, you have your backlog report. And so what I do is that basically I love to have the tickets be created either by clients or by an admin who cannot work the tickets. That way there's no temptation. And in either case, we put a time estimate of 1 hour. A time estimate of 1 hour is essentially a flag that says, this is probably not accurate, right? We probably know it's not really an hour, but every time a technician touches it, they should give a better, more accurate time estimate. Every time the service manager touches it, it should give a better, more accurate time estimate. And so over time, that time in the system becomes, more real. But you should know how many hours come into your system every day, how many hours come into your system every week. And, especially if you do it once a week, that's only 52 times a year. It's not that much of an overhead, but it's a huge number, and you need to know. Again, if you have 500 hours in the system and somebody's going to sell a project that's going to take 120 hours, where does that fit? How soon can we get to that, right? You can make rational decisions about that. So billability and backlog are central to your profitability, right? The backlog is literally the heartbeat of your service board. When you look at it, you can feel the time coming in and coming out. You can feel it beating like a heart. And the more you tune into it, the more you realize that really is the piece that you have to pay attention to, right? And so that, of course, allows you to figure out the profitability of everything you do. So step one, track 100% of your employee time inside the PSA. And the easiest way, I think, to force yourself to do that is to use it for payroll. And that way you don't have any choice but to do it. Step two, use employee billability to determine not only your profitability of everything, but also your backlog. The profitability is, again, profitability of that technician, your entire team, a contract, a client, right, a project. That profitability is profitability of everything. And then that gives you a handle on the backlog. Step 3 is use that backlog information to manage your company, okay? So none of this is easy. None of it is obvious. I'm not trying to pretend like it is, but it is critically important. So just a super quick commercial, and then we'll go to questions. I encourage you to take a look at the Small Biz Thoughts community, smallbizthoughts.org. We do massive amounts of education all the time on every topic you can possibly imagine. We have other presentations in there on managing the service board. It also includes every book I've ever written. So if you want all of my books, presentations, audio programs, everything at no additional charge, it's in the community. The community is only $99 a month or $1,000 a year. And I promise you, you will get your money's worth out of it. There are roughly about a little over 8,000, not quite $8,500 worth of downloads in there right now. So, all righty. And remember, nothing happens by itself. You're not going to wake up Monday morning and all of your employees have put all their time in the system, right? You've got to make that happen. All right, so questions. Will there be copies of the webinar sent out to attendees who can come back to reference? If you attended this, I will give you a replay link. But this is produced by the community. It will be available for all members of the community to just access probably this afternoon. So as quick as I can get it up there. Remember, membership has its privileges. Stephen, is the slide deck available? No, the slide deck is not available. But again, if you are in the community, you'll be able to rewatch the webinar. Or, I mean, obviously, if you're here, you're going to get a link to rewatch the webinar. Is that legal to pay based on time entered? Or if they're in the office from 8 to 5, don't we have to pay 8 hours? Well, Jim, here's the deal. If they're in the office for 8 hours and they put their time in the system, now you know what they were spending those 8 hours on. It's up to you. If you want to pay them for time that they didn't allocate appropriately, that's up to you. But, and in fact, I can tell you in some states, Oregon is one of them, you have to pay them whatever they put on their time card. But if their time card consists of the tickets in the system, that is your time card. And so, you know, I'm not encouraging you to break any laws. What I'm encouraging you to do is to say, look, the way that we track time is in that system. So, you know, put your 8 hours in there. And there's only 2 outcomes that can come from that. One is that they do it and life is good. The other one is they don't do it and you literally fire them and get somebody who does what you're paying them to do. You know, I'm not a hard ass, but I will tell you this. When employees refuse to do the only thing that allows them to be paid, they need to go work for somebody else, right? Nobody is guaranteed, you know, in the technology business. You are not guaranteed a $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year job for not tracking your time or doing what we need to do as a company to be profitable. My personal opinion. And Thomas says, time card is what you pay from. You can use time wrap or admin entries to get the correct amount, but if it's not in the PSA, no pay. So, you know, and in fact, what I love to do, and that's why I said ConnectWise is easier than Autotask or SolarWinds. I want an administrative assistant to have the ability to review time cards. And so what happens is, let's say it's Thursday morning, admin gets to work, looks at every single time card, makes sure that there's no gaps and no overlaps from yesterday. And if there are gaps or overlaps, if it doesn't add up to 8 hours, then she rejects the time card with a note to the technician. The first thing he has to do when he shows up at work is fix yesterday's time card. It only takes a couple of days or a couple of mistakes, and suddenly that issue goes away. And that's just literally a matter of an admin takes half an hour in the morning, reviews 6 or 8 time cards, whatever it is, and suddenly all of your time cards are correct. You know, what you can never allow is for technicians to keep this stuff in their brain and then at night sit down and have a couple of beers and say, let's see, who did I see today? Oh, I saw ABC Company. I think that was about an hour and a half, and then they just reconstruct shit out of their head, right? As Richard Tubbs says, the brain is a horrible place to store information, right? You have to have perfect notes, perfect recall, or you have to work in real time. And so obviously working in real time is the way to get that done. Well, Stephen, it is recorded, so there you go. Do you know anything about Synchro as a PSA or RMM? A lot of ASCII members seem to be using it. So I've heard of Synchro. I haven't personally used it, but I've heard very good things about it. So that's as much as I know. I've never heard anything bad about it, I can tell you that. Currently, what term break fix majority of work is prepared block time? For example, 20 hours for clients at 145. Is there any realistic way to track and charge for travel time? Okay, so not sure what all the questions are there, David, but for break fix, we're pretty hard nosed. I mean, we pretty much haven't done break fix for about 10 years, but 15 years. But we're pretty hard nosed about the hourly on that. We don't give away time and so forth. In terms of travel time, there's lots of ways to track travel time. Some people track from the time they get in the car until they arrive at the client, right? So let's say that's 18 minutes, 15 minutes. And then if they're going from client to client, then it's from the time they get in the car till the time they get to the next client. Other people you can, in terms of tracking miles, you can map things on Google Maps and then have these sort of standard allocations that it is, 17 miles to this client, 14 miles to that client, and 6 miles to that client. And then you just put those in for the claiming your miles, either to the feds or to if you reimburse for mileage. And so you could do time estimates on that as well. Some people have a flat fee, they charge X dollars to roll a truck, $60 to roll a truck plus the time. And so that sort of covers that. I never charged for travel time. What we did is had a minimum. So it's a 1 hour minimum in the city of Sacramento. It is 2 hours outside the city, and it is 4 hours if we have to go to the Bay Area. So that's just kind of our way of making sure we got enough money to make sure it covered it. Joel says it's hard enough to get techs to fill out their timesheets. How hard is it to get admin, sales, marketing, da-da-da-da-da? Again, if you pay based on it, right, there's 3 a.m. in Sydney. I like that. Think about a triangle. The base of the triangle is your process, right? It's got a limited size. And then one arm of the triangle is the will do, or is the can do, right? You hire people who can do what you ask them to do. But the volume of your triangle is determined by the third arm, which is, will they do what you're paying them to do? You've got a process, you've got the ability to do it, and then it's whether or not they actually do it. I have to say, once we started making every technician work in real time so that they finish a job, and whether it's 15 minutes or 2 hours, they open up a ticket, they put their time, they put their notes in the ticket. As soon as we did that, the issue of time cards went away. And again, like I said, I've never understood why technicians don't put their time in the system. It's just beyond my comprehension. But this is Jim, we pay employees for their time when traveling from client A to B to C, etc. We charge a flat fee trip charge to clients. How does the employee travel time versus the trip charge affect billability calculations? Well, part of it is that assuming you're billing that trip charge as an item to a client, it simply comes out as the revenue generated by that client, right? And so then the time that you pay the employee is also allocated to that ticket, right? So you can say, for example, in a ticket, you can have 15 minutes that is travel time, even if the client gets charged half an hour. But in the ticket, it'll say 15 minutes travel time. you should have a time entry for travel time, especially if you don't charge the client. If you're on the clock to the client, then just put it as time on the ticket. But if you're not, then it should be a travel time. But you can have travel time towards a service contract, and in fact, you should. You know, I'm a big believer. Everybody should have a minimum of 2 contracts in the PSA. So you sign 1 contract with the client, but in the PSA, you put 1 contract for billable time and materials and a separate contract for managed services. So whatever that ticket is, that's where you're going to allocate that drive time. And so that way again, the goal is to know the profitability of that individual contract. And you get that only if you track the time. You know, the old rule in computers is garbage in, garbage out, right? You can't get a report out of a system if you don't put the information into the system. So, cool. Other questions or comments? All righty, thank you all. So I will send you a follow-up email. It will have information about the replay. And I encourage you all to take a look at the community. The community is growing very nicely, and we really have some amazing stuff in there. So if you haven't seriously considered it, or you like glossed over it, I would like you to just take a minute and look. We do a lot of stuff to help you be more successful. So thank you all. If that's it, I will go ahead and put this to sleep, and I will get the recording up as quickly as I can. Thank you all.